Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773's Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, comedy on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today, wherever you are in the world. Hoping you're finding peace in your life, in your relationships, in your music, and everything else in between. And I just recently got on Instagram after burrowing in fairly deep on Facebook for the last 10 years. And one of the cats that I connected with originally, that I connected with on Instagram, is my next guest. He's a prolific horn player who, through his father's rabid obsession with jazz, was hearing it every day in his house, before, during, and after school when his dad would come home from work. And through this, in his ears, he was able to begin to delineate and beg, borrow, and steal from the masters and the people that he looked up to, and eventually find his own very unique, original sound. And it comes through because when he would have the gall and the guile to go up to people like Freddie, Hubbard, and people like that who, in my mind, were intimidating to just go up to begin with. Not only that, he brought a cassette tape up to him and said, "Hey, dig on this, man." And sure enough, Freddie listened to it and invited him up. And every time Freddie would come through Washington, D.C., my guest would be able to come up on the bandstand and sit in with the band. And that led to collaborations along the way with, again, really the original masters of some of this music, Sonny Rollins and people like the late great Dizzy Gillespie, and then also the amazing poet and riffologist Gil Scott-Heron. My guest has continued on today in a lot of different amalgamations, Susan Tedeschi Band, Warren Haynes and Government Mule, and albeit he's got to sing for his supper. It's really not, if you're going to be an artist, it's better to be able to sing for your supper so you're not hungry, because if you're full and you can eat, then your art is probably going to be better. That is a hard proposition for younger cats, my peers in today's world, because of the shrinking venues, how a musician's role in society has changed. And just the mere fact that the only way that you can really make music, or make money rather, in music today is through live touring. Publishing has gone by the wayside, and the record industry is a shell of what it once was. Not that everything was perfect back in the day, but let's be clear. My guest is able to be a bridge, a link in the chain between the cats that came before him and the ones that are here now and will continue on after the pandemic has left us. Ron Holloway, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Glad to be here, Jake. Thank you for having me.
It's an honor to have you, man. We have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I'm going to put this in for you right now. Take a listen to it, pay attention to the content, and we'll come back and talk about it.
Okay.
I'm going to answer this way, and at the risk of sounding political, but so be it. When I look at our society, the economic landscape, okay, and whatever have you, and I relate it to jazz or music in general, our culture, okay. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I have noticed is that our culture is continually being stifled, okay? And culture is the underpinning and backbone of any society. And when you see programs, okay, that are being pushed forward to nullify education, for example, to take away someone's ability to even just eat and clothe and house themselves, when there is a push to deny the right to be healthy, okay? this is at the underpinning, and I'm becoming more and more fearful of the move in that direction. Hopefully, I can count on the intelligence and the sensitivity of American society in general. But it's here. We're going to have to deal with this somehow or another, or else we're going to endure, negative consequences beyond belief.
You want to take a guess at who that is?
Oh man, that voice sounds so familiar. I feel like I should know who that is.
Well, I would never play somebody for you that you didn't collaborate with. But if you want to take a guess, you can. I mean, it's he's left, just for the record, I did that interview 8 years ago, and the hair stands up on the back of my neck because he was so spot on, considering where we are today. That was the late.
Yeah,
You want to take a guess?
No. I'm afraid I'd be wrong, but
yeah, no, you can. A lot of people say, "Oh, I was going to say that," but anyway, that was the late great Larry Willis.
Okay, that's why it sounded so familiar.
Exactly. Go ahead.
If that was said 8 years ago, it was almost like prophetic about what's happening right now.
Dude, Ron, I mean, listen. I haven't listened to that clip. He goes on to talk about when you push culture and deny culture and push it off the street and gentrify everything, and people don't know where they came from, that's how you get another Hitler. I mean, I cannot believe this was during Obama's second term. I mean, I cannot believe. I mean, that guy was a genius anyway. Can you talk, based on what you know and what you've lived through, can you just talk about if you agree with him and how you've seen that culture, the culture of Keith Kilgo, Kevin Toney, the Blackbirds, Ron Holloway, all the major inner cities, and also just the music itself, how it has been stifled? If you agree with that, and how you've, through your own view, how you've seen it be stifled.
Well, I have lived what he's talking about. We used to celebrate a certain radio station here in my area, in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, many years ago because it was so eclectic. And really, when you're growing up as a young musician, if you have your ears open, you're hearing all kinds of music because your peers are not necessarily listening to exactly what you're listening to. Mm-hmm. I don't like to deny the importance of people who are playing in genres other than jazz. I never want to be a snob about music. There are people who have made very profound statements about society who are not playing jazz music. Mm-hmm. Example is like Bob Dylan. He's always been able to address things that are wrong in American society, if you really listen.
Pete Seeger as well, absolutely.
Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder. It's a long list. So I used to run into my friends who played jazz in the Washington, D.C. area. Late at night, there was a club that was open until the wee hours in the morning. And all the jazz musicians would congregate there after their regular gigs. So I went in there one night. It was a club called the One Step Down in Washington, D.C. Huh. And I must have arrived there like about 2:30 a.m., and the music was still happening. So a friend of mine was sitting at the bar, and there was a seat right beside him. And I went and sat next to him, and we started talking. And he says, so what are you doing? You coming from one of your boogaloo gigs? I just let a pregnant pause go by, and I said, well, actually, yeah, I am. Mm-hmm. I said, but how are you doing? And he says, starving my ass off. Mm-hmm. Another pregnant pause goes by. And I said, well, maybe you should be doing some of these boogaloo gigs. He didn't want to do anything outside of jazz. And I understand that because, you get deep into that kind of music. But, I found living in a big city here in Washington, D.C., that I could not really make a living playing music if I relied solely on so-called jazz fans. They didn't always come out. So, I mean, there are other types of music that I absolutely love. I've always had a deep respect for blues musicians, funk musicians, R&B musicians. And I love playing that kind of music. And each one of them is actually an art form. I mean, I've seen beboppers get up on stage and try and play with a blues band, and it didn't work out too well.
I wanted to talk to you about, because I mean, did you get a chance to talk with Sonny about his days with Screamin' Jay Hawkins on the R&B circuit? I mean, I think the revelation for me on this trip over the last 10 years is to know that Train, Cannon, Sonny Rollins, Charlie Neville, Alan Toussaint, Earl Palmer, those guys were all walking the bar, playing the R&B stuff before they got into the intellectual bebop stuff. It all comes from blues. I mean, did you talk to Sonny about his...
Some more than others. Yeah. Some more than others,
Sure.
But Train definitely did that because in several different articles and books that I've read, Benny Golson talks about walking into a club and catching Train up on the bar, and John was so embarrassed he jumped off the bar and walked out of the club.
See, he was just, that's, I have people in, I got to look the cat's name up. Great studio, George Young from New York, great studio musician, was in Wildwood, New Jersey, and there was Train walking the bar, Cannon walking the bar. I mean, it's like, but I mean, the blues, that's what, I want you to talk about your own, and I love how open-minded you are. You came up during an era when there was just this gumbo, everything was mixing together, but obviously there was still a separation. How did you learn to play the blues, Ron? Because, thankfully, there are no sharecroppers anymore. But I mean, the truth is, a lot of the blues masters would say that it's easy to go from the bottom up, meaning you can make a blues player a jazz player. But in today's world, if you're going to the academy to get a jazz degree, it's going to be pretty intellectual. There's not going to be a lot of blues if you can afford to pay $40,000 to go to Berkeley or anywhere where they've codified this language. How did you learn to play the blues authentically?
On-the-job training. I mean, there were like 50 clubs around the area, and they all had different types of music. But some nights I wanted to play, and there was no jazz band playing anywhere. So I had to ask myself, well, what do I do now? There's nobody playing that kind of music that I want to play with tonight. But I had friends who were playing the blues. So I would go and sit in with them. And on nights when I couldn't find an R&B band or a blues band or something like that, I actually sat in with country bands.
I love it.
Playing a saxophone.
Oh, I love it.
But, like the latest thing that I've done that I was really excited about was there was a very great bluegrass band called Cabinet. And I sat in with them many times. And it was something, trying to play bluegrass on the saxophone and fit in with it.
I got to hear some of those tapes, man. I love it. I really love, you're stretching vocabulary. But it's like Pat Martino told me he walked into Small's Paradise and he's there, and John Coltrane, who he considers his idol, he takes his teeth out to play. These guys the blues was in their life. Like, you have to know the blues to play the blues. And I'm not saying you have to have trauma, but I'm just saying I just look at it and I say that, when I hear modern improvisational music today with younger cats, there's a homogenization of sound. I don't hear individual sound, and I don't hear the blues. I hear a classicalized version of this music. And I mean, can you talk about adversity you might have faced when you were younger that at least you could tell your story through your horn? I mean, Rusty Bryant, Don Patterson, Sonny Stitt, who I hear a little bit of Stitt in you. I mean, those guys, Sonny Stitt was like, I mean, it's funny, everybody comes, young football player comes out of college and they're like, oh, he's just like Tom Brady, or he's just like this. But they in Stitt, they were like, oh, he's Charlie Parker. And he had to live in that shadow for a while, which was probably not an easy thing to do until he found his own thing. I mean, can you talk about what adversity you might have faced when you were younger and how it made you a stronger person and how you were able to channel that through your horn?
Well, I mean, you never stop facing adversity. I faced adversity when I was younger, and I faced it in my formative years, and I still face it. But I must say I can tell the difference now, because when I face adversity and it's coming from a silly place,
right,
I know where it's coming from, and believe me, it does not bother me for 5 seconds.
No, can you talk about it? How did you learn to let that go? I mean, when was a time when can you talk about a definitive, because I agree with you, life is adversity, and the only way you grow is through adversity. And I agree that, you probably have a better detector now, but can you talk about a time in your earlier career when you faced some adversity and it was a turning point because you were able to push through it and you grew from it?
Well, it was a slow process. I mean, it didn't happen all of a sudden. And recently I realized, I won't say I've become impervious to it, but I would say that I realize it doesn't hold any water. The whole thing about, man, why are you playing R&B? Why are you playing the blues?
Dig.
If you want to play something authentically, you can't look down at that kind of music. You have to have a certain amount of respect for every type of music that you play. And that was a natural thing for me. I don't know how people get to the point where they don't take a certain type of music seriously. Because like I said, I've seen beboppers get up on stage and try and play chameleon. And as soon as the song was over, they were like, the band leader was like, yes, ladies and gentlemen, that was so-and-so. Hey, thanks for coming by.
Yeah, that's it. That'll be it for him. It didn't work at all.
Not at all. So, I mean, I've seen that so many times. And knowing what it takes to play all these different types of music, I don't look down on any kind of music at all. I respect all genres because they can all be art forms. You have to be serious about it.
Was there, can you talk a little bit amongst your peers in the early 70s, the kind of loft scene that existed and the experimentation that existed within Washington, D.C., so that, there wasn't this, bop. There was obviously the bop purists and the hardcore purists around, but you obviously had a lot of soul jazz coming in, and you felt the blues. But in New York, even through the loft scenes provided opportunities for cats who maybe couldn't necessarily play bebop. They could play, though, and it gave them opportunities to jam. Was there a collective of cats that you used to jam with and experiment with in D.C.?
Yes, but not like in New York. The loft scene in New York was like... it was like well known. It was something that had been established and it was ongoing for a long time. But you really didn't have that kind of a scene in D.C. You had clubs that stayed open late, but I wouldn't say there was a lost scene.
How did you, or what is your advice to cats today? I remember Ndugu Chancellor, rest in peace, when I met up with him and did 3 interviews with him, but in person, and he said the one thing about, he was teaching at USC, and he said, a lot of the cats that come there today, that come to the music school, are international students, and that's fine. Or they're from the States, but they play with each other. I mean, they jam with each other in the student union or wherever, and Ndugu said, I kind of don't. I wish they would go out and find the cats with the rubber bands around their horns. And the guys who are, and playing the blues and not being so purist about the music. And I would love you, and I feel like so deeply and passionately about, those files you sent me are amazing. And, Gil Scott-Heron, when he was riffing on Is That Jazz, he was just talking about, we need new ideas. We need new creations. We don't need these labels. He was talking about how he walks into a record.
Oh, yeah.
He walks into a record.
Is That Jazz?
Yeah, he walks into a record store and he's like, I'm finding my records in miscellaneous. Like he's like, why do we need labels? What would you say to younger cats who are, through no fault of their own, are growing up in this age of, we are saturated with visual material, a lot of mediocre material, and yet people are still hungry. They still want to strive to be open-minded. They still want to find their own sound. Can you talk to younger cats about how to be not just tolerant, but accepting of other musics and incorporating those musics so that you can become not just a more well-rounded player, but truly your own player?
Well, I mean, a person has to find their own reason for going back and digging in, like to historic recordings. I was fortunate because I was surrounded by those records. My dad started collecting records around 1951.
Wow.
So when I was in the womb, literally, all of 1952, I was hearing records from my mom's stomach.
Wow.
And so when I came out in 1953, I was still hearing it, and I heard it up until the time I actually started playing a horn, which was at 13 years old. But I didn't develop any kind of desire to play music during the time I was growing up. That only happened by what was seemingly an accident. I happened to be sitting in an auditorium in the beginning of 7th grade, and a couple of friends of mine wanted to go up to the band room and learn how to play an instrument. The band teacher had got up on the stage during orientation that day, the first day, and said, "We don't have enough students to form a school band this year." So my friends were flanking me. One was on the right, one was on the left, and they're talking over me like I wasn't even there. I guess they knew I wasn't interested. And actually, I wanted to do something in the science realm because at that point I owned my own telescope and my own microscope, and I really wanted to see if I could do something as a scientist. That's what I had in my mind. But these guys talked me into going up to the band room the next morning at 8 a.m. I went up there with them, and the music teacher pulled out 3 instruments, French horn, a B-flat clarinet, and an E-flat alto sax.
Wow.
And because I had seen, a couple of thousand albums with saxophone pictured on the cover, my dad's record collection, I spoke up immediately because I recognized the sax. I said, I want to play that. And my other friends were like really disappointed because I think they knew instinctively they wouldn't be able to play in a James Brown type band playing a French horn and a clarinet.
I love it. I love it.
So I was immediately a target because I had picked the instrument they wanted.
Huh.
And thank goodness I did. Both of them quit after 2 years. And here I am, like 54 years later, still playing.
Wow. I mean, that is remarkable. I mean, can you talk, one of the L's on my show is leadership. And, you know, in your own mind, in your own way, you talk about someone like Dizzy. And, you know, I've interviewed, Michael Howell and Mike Longo and Mickey Roker and all these guys that play with Diz. You know what, in your mind, what made him and Sonny, Freddie? I mean, I idolize these guys because I didn't really know them personally, especially someone like Freddie Hubbard, who basically had a split personality and could be really unbelievably vicious.
Where did you get that from?
Well, I mean, Phil Ranlin, I mean, they literally got in a fight at Royce Hall. I mean, that was just one of the things. But, I mean, that's what Carl Burnett told me. He said that Freddie was so crazy that, sometimes he'd come out and start yelling at the audience because they were being disrespectful. He said, but for all the insanity, he's like, when Freddie was on, it made it all better. It made it perfect. So,
man, when he was on, he was like superhuman. It was like standing next to a volcano as it was erupting.
Dude, that's what I'm saying.
I'm not kidding. Yeah. And I mean, nobody coaxed me on that. The thing was, that's the first thing that came to mind years ago. And people they used to ask me all the time, man, what was that like standing on the same stage with Freddie Hubbard? And before I could even think about it, I said, well, it was sort of like standing next to a volcano as it's going off. And I thought, hey, that's good because that's exactly what it felt like.
Wow.
He was a force of nature, really.
He was a force of nature. I want you to really paint this picture. You talk about, was it Jazz Alley? Where did you what was the club? Talk about, because I think it's so cool. As a younger cat, you went up with the cassette tape or whatever, and I just take us through the story of connecting with Freddie and then ultimately being doused with hot lava on the bandstand.
Well, let's see. That was probably chronologically the first major jazz icon that I sat in with, Freddie Hubbard. That was in 1974. So I was about, I guess, just getting ready to turn 21. And what I used to do was I'd be in the basement with my dad's record player, and I'd put albums on the turntable, and then I would stand on the other side of the basement. We had a large basement, and I would stand all the way on the other side, and I'd put the microphone. We're talking crude here.
I love it. No, this is great, man.
But this is what I thought to do at that age, around in my late teens and into my 20s. And I used to position a microphone and one of those little Panasonic tape recorders.
Sure.
I used to put the microphone very close to the speaker so that the guy who I was listening to would come across loud and clear, along with the rhythm section. And I'd be across the room. And so when you heard the tape, it was really balanced out. It sounded kind of like I was a part of the record.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it. Perfect.
So I used to make a lot of tapes like that. And I heard that Freddie Hubbard was coming to this club in D.C. called the Etc. For anybody who knows D.C., this was located on M Street as you're leaving Northwest D.C. and going into Georgetown towards Blues Alley. So the Etc. was a short-lived club, and it didn't last but a few years, and it was actually closed. They finally closed it because they found rat feces on the premises. I think they got a warning, but they never did get rid of the problem. So they closed, the Board of Health closed them up. But before they got closed up, people like Freddie, Hubbard, and Sonny Rollins, and many other artists came through. And so on the first night that Freddie was there, my dad and I came by there, and I brought his Panasonic tape recorder, and I went up to the dressing room during the break, and I said, "Hi, Freddie," and I introduced myself, and I said, "I got something I want you to hear." So he was very polite and attentive, and he listened to my tape. And so after he heard me solo, he said, "You got your horn?" I said, "No, sir, I didn't bring it. I just didn't want to assume that I could sit in tonight." He said, "Well, I'll tell you what, bring it back on Sunday night." Sunday night was the last night of his residency. So I brought my horn down there on Sunday night, and went to the dressing room and warmed up. And then he had me come up and play. I think the first number we played was a tune called Straight Life.
Oh, my God. This is so beyond the pale, man.
And so fortunately, I was in good form that night. I think I got a really enthusiastic response from the audience. And after the song was over, Freddie said to the audience, he says, "Wow, you got any more of these in this town?" So
I love it.
he was, he invited me to come by and sit in with him whenever he was in D.C. He said, "If I'm playing somewhere around here, you bring your horn by." So I was always very fortunate that way, because that was the response of Sonny Rollins and Dizzy Gillespie when I met them. I always seemed to get some kind of invitation from them to feel free to come by and play. So I thought I was on the right track from that. But what I like to say to younger musicians, I was catching the tail end of an era. You can't find the architects of jazz to sit in with now.
That's right.
Because many of them are gone. Dizzy Gillespie, along with Charlie Parker and Thelonious Monk and a few others, was one of the main architects of bebop jazz. So that was like sitting in with, that was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And fortunately, Dizzy liked my playing and was open to the idea of me sitting in. And of course, I probably did not realize the full significance of that kind of an invitation when I got it. I was pretty young. And when I look back on it now, I'm kind of aghast. I'm like, wow, I actually pulled that off. But the thing was, I wasn't doing it for money or to be seen or anything like that. I was doing it because I felt like that's what I should do to improve as a musician. In other words, if there's an opportunity to play with somebody like Dizzy Gillespie, well, I've at least got to try and do it. And so, fortunately for me, it actually happened, and I actually wound up joining his band.
When you, first of all, was it like George Cables and Michael Carvin? Do you remember who was in the band? Henry Franklin? I mean, all these guys are they're all friends of mine. I've done interviews with them. I cannot believe that you...
You mean who was
in Freddie's band? Yeah. Ralph Pendlin, Kent Brinkley.
I remember who was in Dizzy's band. That was... I met Dizzy at a club called the Showboat Lounge in Silver Spring, Maryland in 1977, like 3 years after I had sat in with Freddie.
Right.
I went down on Dizzy's first night, which was always a Tuesday night. They always started the week on a Tuesday night. And Dizzy was a big enough name where he was able to draw a crowd every night. So he was there 6 nights. I went down there on a Tuesday night, and I walked around. I followed the sound because Dizzy was sitting in a dressing room warming up, playing long tones. So I walked around there, and he had the door wide open, and it was just him sitting in a dressing room about 45 minutes before hit time. And I did not say a word. I just stood there in the door frame, and I watched him. And after he got finished with what he was doing, he looked up at me, and the first thing he said was, he didn't say, "Hi, how you doing?" He said, "What you got on the tape?" Because he had seen me standing there.
Oh, my dude, that is so hip, man. I love it, dude.
So he lets go of the last note, the last long tone, pulls the horn away from his lips and goes, "What you got on the tape?"
Wow.
I said, "Mr. Gillespie," I said, "my name is Ron Holloway. I play tenor sax, and I've got a tape here of myself sitting with Sonny Rollins at Howard University, and I just wonder if I could play it for you." So he didn't say yes or no. He took his right hand and patted the chair next to him about 3 times, like, "Come sit here."
Mm-hmm.
So I went and sat in the chair, and I pressed play. And he kind of like positioned himself so he could hear every note. He was very attentive. And once he heard me take my solo, he asked me to stop the tape. And he said, "You got your horn?" I said, "Well, sir, I didn't bring my horn because I didn't want to appear presumptuous."
Right.
And he goes, "Presumptuous? Now there's a word."
Dude.
And we both burst out laughing.
Oh, I love it.
And so he said, "Well, bring it tomorrow night." So I brought it Wednesday night and went to the dressing room that night about an hour before hit time, started warming up. And he never did address me as though I was someone special. He just looked around to the band and myself, and he said, "Okay, fellas, you ready?" And everybody started to walk out to the stage, and I was like, I said to Rodney Jones,
Sure.
the guitarist,
Sure.
I said, "Does he mean me too?" He says, "Yeah, you're here."
Dude, this is so beyond, man. I love it.
I walked out on stage with the band, and of course nobody in the audience knew that I wasn't in the band. And I didn't look afraid, I just had to look like, kind of nonchalant. I did not know what he was going to play. I had no idea. The whole time I'd been back there warming up, he never said, "Okay, we're going to play such and such, and then we're going to play this, and then we're going to play that." He never said a word about repertoire.
Right.
So the first thing that he launched into was the St. Louis Blues by W.C. Handy.
So crazy.
It was kind of a rock jazz version of W.C. Handy's tune. And I hit it right with the band, and I played the head because I knew the melody. And so that was pretty easy. And then the second tune, he got up on the microphone and he said, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to play a tune that typifies what we're all about. The name of this composition is Bebop." And Rodney Jones goes on his guitar, dun, 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 which is like saying, "Okay, man, you're on the spot now." Because, bebop is like really fast. It's got all these really fast passing chords and everything. And so as soon as Rodney went, dun, 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 I knew he was aiming that at me. I looked around at him, and he started laughing. So we hit the head, and fortunately that was a tune that had always intrigued me because I heard it down in the basement of my parents, heard it on record, and I said, "What in the world is that?" When you're that young and you hear something like that, you realize at least this is what I realized at that age. I didn't know what they were playing, but I knew there was a logic to it. I could hear like certain ideas being repeated in different keys and stuff like that. And that's the kind of thing that used to really intrigue me. It was like, this is so complex, but there's obviously an order to it. There's a logic happening. So I learned it. And it was a fortunate thing because I never knew I was going to be called upon to play it spontaneously like that.
How did it work? I mean, was it at a breakneck tempo?
Yes, it was. He did not pull any punches.
I love it.
He counted it off at the same tempo he always played it. And I mean, it was like really fast. And I hit every note.
Wow.
And so after I did that, then he was really like, okay. He knew bebop. And so he just kept playing every tune that he would normally play in his set. And at the end of the night, he said, okay, well, come back every night this week. I said, I will be here. And so that was the beginning of me sitting in with him for many years in the D.C. area. When I first started sitting in with Dizzy, I did not expect to be paid. That would have been like sacrilege to think about being paid, because I felt like I was already getting so much benefit from just being up there.
Absolutely.
But during those years that I sat in with him, after the Showboat Lounge closed up, he moved to Blues Alley in D.C. So he moved from a Maryland club to a D.C. club, an iconic club, actually. Blues Alley is
Absolutely.
a real
Sure.
icon. So I started playing with him there, and before I knew anything, he started paying me. So one night he called me into the dressing room. It was just he and I in there, and he handed me like a few $100s. And I said, "Oh, Dizzy, you don't have to do this." He says, "No, man. You come here. You come here early. You come here dressed up. You know the material, so you deserve to be paid." I said, "Okay." I didn't turn it down. So, eventually he asked me to be in his band.
This is like such a most heartwarming. I mean, it's so amazing to talk to someone like you who, you talked so eloquently about Monk and Bird and Diz, all these guys, the forerunners of music and of this music, and to be sort of young. I'm just going to be very naive here and ask you. Now I understand that just for an example, Tedeschi Trucks or Warren Haynes or any outfit that you were playing gigs with, any kind of outfit before the pandemic, you recognize that if Jake Feinberg was some wide-eyed 20-year-old cat, I could never do what you did with Freddie or Dizzy. I could never get to you backstage. I mean, it was the point I'm making is that these people were completely accessible. They were stars, and Dizzy was a star. Freddie was a star. Those guys maybe weren't millionaires. They made a good living. They were completely accessible. You walked back into the dressing room and connected with them. If I was a younger tenor player, I could never do that today. And I just wonder why, and I'm not being naive. I know that, media is more intense than ever before. It's very intrusive. But I'm just talking about younger musicians because, let's face it, you had direct contact with people that, were preeminent musicians and trailblazers of that time. You actually walked to the back room, not only connected with them, they immediately wanted you to bring their horn. There was no entourages. There was none of this, in my mind, musicians, maybe through no fault of their own, but just through the corporate business component of it, have become completely walled off so that younger musicians could never experience what you experienced. And I wonder why you think it got to that point.
Why was that door open for me?
No, why has it gotten so cut off? Why have we gotten to the point of deifying these people? I mean, I guess that's the point, is that these, I just look at so many of these acts, and I've been part of it, but, people that could genuinely help continue to stretch the lineage and the magic of saying, well, why don't you come up and play with us? And I realize it's not like, like the Showboat and those places, you might be playing bigger venues with some of these bigger names, but it just seems to me that we've deified people, and there's all this protection around these people. There was no protection around Freddie Hubbard. There was no protection around Dizzy Gillespie. You walked right into the dressing room and connected with them, and they didn't know you from a hole in the wall. And then they heard you play.
Well, remember now, jazz musicians are not as walled off as some iconic rock musician.
I agree.
It's always been that way. If they looked at me and thought that I was some kind of crazed lunatic, I'm sure they would have whistled real loud one time and I would have been hauled off. But, thinking back on it, and I have asked myself that same question that you're asking. Mm-hmm. I think it's safe to say when they saw me at that young age, in my early 20s, they were looking at somebody, and they had seen that particular model of musician many times in their past. In fact, they might have seen themselves in me, because I was very pure. I had no kind of agenda or hidden motive. It was all about, can I learn from you? Am I good enough? Can I come up on stage and play a song with you? And as it turned out, thank goodness I had done enough homework in my parents' basement where I was at a level where not only did they let me come up and play one or two songs, but they let me play the whole set. And then they asked me if I wanted to finish out the week. So I just happened to be this very young and pure musician who was up there for the music. They knew that.
I would also, I think you're right. I think the difference is that they were directly they could see it themselves. They made the call.
It was written all over me.
Well, what I'm saying is the difference now is that if and I've done this with, people like David Grisman or Pat Martino or, it doesn't matter, Tower of Power. I've done when I've been on the road before the pandemic, I was traveling a lot, doing a lot of Facebook Live interviews, and you have to go through management, and you have to go through a publicist, and you have to go through people who maybe they're decent people. They would never know Jake Feinberg if he was. Freddie and Dizzy saw you directly. They said, I can see myself in him, or I can see that this is a guy who I've seen millions of times. They made the call. Now it's
right. Dizzy actually said to me one time one time I was actually late, or just about late, for something that was supposed to be happening. I think maybe a sound check or something. And I was not a person who was habitually late, especially playing with somebody like Dizzy, because that was very important to me, and I knew how important being punctual was. Mm-hmm. But that one time I was kind of late, I was making up some kind of excuse as we were walking along together, and he said, just stop. He says, I've heard all this before. I've seen you before.
Right, right.
And that ended it, because I knew when he said that, he certainly has seen me before. We're talking about somebody who's been playing, jazz music since the late 1930s. So I was nothing new, and he had heard all the excuses.
It's so beautiful to talk to you because your street scholar education, if you want to call it that, is so fundamentally different than what's happening today. You walked into these mercurial clubs. You connected directly. I mean, you shedded in your basement. You played with your friends. You played all types of music. You walk in, then you're on the bandstand with these cats in settings. The PA systems were not always great. Not everybody was always, there was not always amplification on the bass, so your ears were growing a lot. I mean, it is so hard today, in my mind. It's just so amazing how we veered away from that street scholar education. And you are a living example of that. I mean, I'd say Jimmy Owens was even younger than you. He was at Small's Paradise, and he brought his trumpet, and it was the Miles Davis quintet with Cannon, Train, Bill Evans, and Jimmy Cobb, and they had just done, I guess, Kind of Blue, and Jimmy walks up to the bandstand, and Miles is like, "You brought your trumpet?" And, you know, sure enough, he's up there. He's 10 years old playing with the guys. I mean, that to me, and it was funny because when Jimmy Owens talked to Jimmy Cobb, rest in peace, about that experience, he said, "Do you remember that?" And Jimmy's like, "Of course I remember that." He's like, "How do you remember that?" He's like, "Because Philly Joe was at the bar watching me, and I was scared to death, you know, because he was playing drums, and he wanted to, you know, he knew Philly was watching, and he took Philly's place." It's just,
right.
You know, can you just, from your own mind, just talk about, again, we're using labels, but, you know, the jazz community, it was a family. I mean, if you could play, you were accepted. It was not, even though it was music that was born in this country, even when it was mainstream popular music, it really was a family. Is that fair to say that it was inclusive? Are you living proof of that?
I am living proof of a few things, and one of the things that I'm proof of is that there was always in the jazz realm, because of the history and the things that you read about in jazz anecdote books about so-and-so coming up, having his axe at a very young age and wanting to sit in. At that moment, at that precise moment, you are being sized up.
Right.
I've had that experience. Because of my upbringing, I knew how to approach people. That's very important. You can't go up acting cocky. I had a buddy of mine. I happened to be in London one year, 1979, with Gil Scott-Heron, and we had a lot of off nights there. Well, when I say off nights, I mean nights when we were not playing as a
right.
band.
Yeah, I did. You were always on. You guys were always on fire. Yeah.
So we were not working on this particular night. It was a Saturday night, and Dizzy's quintet was playing at Ronnie Scott's, another iconic London club. So I had this magazine, and I'm reading through it like, I'm going to go nuts if I don't go play somewhere. And I saw it. I was like, Dizzy Gillespie at Ronnie Scott's all week long. So I went down there, and I went to the dressing room. As soon as I came in, Dizzy goes, "Ah!" You know, he gives you that kind of recognition. He said, "Got your horn?"
Yeah, right. You're like, I brought it this time, yeah.
And I said, "Yes, I have it." He says, "All right, come on, sit in with us." So, let me see, I'm trying to think. He did not have a saxophone player in the band at this time. When I first met Dizzy in the late 70s, he was traveling around with himself, guitarist, bass player, and a drummer. The first time I sat in with him, he had Rodney Jones on guitar.
Right.
He had Benjamin Brown on electric bass, and he had Mickey Rooker on drums. That was his quartet. So, over the years it changed. Eventually Ed Cherry came in on guitar.
Dude, Ed Cherry, I think Michael Howell played bass. I mean, it's ridiculous.
That's right.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. They were in the band together.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually Tommy Campbell came in on drums.
Right.
So because I didn't live in the New York area, I played with every configuration of Dizzy's band that there was. Every time he came in town, if there was a change,
right.
I was still the only sax player,
I was going to ask you about so that makes sense, because I was going to say I was like, when Rodney was like, yeah, you're here, man, let's go, and I was like, was there another sax player? But you were the only one, so it wasn't like there would be any, I don't know, blowing competition, so to speak. You were the only one,
Well, as Dizzy got older, he started hiring sax players that were in the New York, New Jersey area. He himself lived in Orange, New Jersey.
Right.
But he played in New York a lot, in the New York clubs. So one year when he came to D.C. to Blues Alley, he had a gentleman who played baritone sax, flute, and clarinet. His name was Saeed Abdul Al-Kabir.
I know that name.
And Saeed also had his son in the band. Nasser played drums, father and son. So I was surprised because every other time I'd ever played with Dizzy, there was no other sax player, and I didn't know how that was going to work. But when I showed up, he obviously wanted me to play. So then after Saeed left, he hired, and I know this happened because of Ed Cherry. Ed Cherry had played with Sam Rivers in some situation. So when it opened up, Ed made sure that Sam got the gig, But once again, Dizzy made it very clear that he wanted me to continue coming by and sitting in.
Absolutely.
So I got to play with Sam Rivers a lot.
Oh my! Whoa! So I don't want to lose track of the Ronnie Scott story. Was there something? Because you were like, he's like, did you bring your?
Thank you. Right. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's all right.
So one night I came by Ronnie Scott's in London, and Diz was very surprised to see me because he had only seen me in D.C.
Yeah.
And so a friend of mine came into the dressing room with me, an alto player. I will not mention his name. But this friend of mine, I don't know why he came off as cocky as he did, but he was a bit too self-assured. And I picked up on it. I didn't have time to say anything, but I just kind of watched the whole thing unfold. And so my friend's standing there, Dizzy sitting down, looking up at the two of us. And he's already asked me if I had my horn. And then my friend says, Miss Gillespie, my name is so-and-so, and I play alto, and I like to sit in as well. But Dizzy did not like the way he asked that question. So Dizzy's looking up at him like he's studying the guy. And in slow motion, he starts moving his head from side to side. And he never did say no, but he had that motion like,
Mm-hmm.
So because of the way this guy came off.
Right, it was not the right approach.
He didn't let him sit in, and it was all based on demeanor and the way that he approached, the way he presented himself at that moment. So these guys, talking about the older jazz musicians, they're very sensitive, and it's like you have to show a certain amount of respect. And fortunately, these are things that my parents instilled in me, so I was always very careful when I would meet Dizzy or Freddie Hubbard or Sonny Rollins or anybody on that level. McCoy Tyner, anybody that I sat in with, I would always make sure that I was very respectful towards them.
Having such a great time here with Ron Holloway on the Jake Feinberg Show. I got another voice to play for you. I think you might know who it is. Let's take a listen to it and come back and talk about it.
Okay.
And I have to make a major introduction to my parents.
Sure.
They were the ones that actually set a lot of these things up, while we were 8 and 10 and 12 and 14. And by the time we were 12 and 14, we pretty much were making our own musical decisions. But there was a handful of acting at the time, and so between both worlds, our parents were very hands-on and bringing the right influences, artistic influences into our lives, and so this thing with Donald Byrd was one of those, and he actually set up a performance at Howard University at that time to do just an afternoon, session, and that actually really was the beginning for me to actually feel like, hey, I can do something with this. I really feel like, if I take the right steps, and just keep playing and stay in tune, maybe I can make something out of this for my life. Yeah.
You want to take a guess at who that is?
Oh man, you stumped me with this.
Well, this is sort of just a hunch that I feel like you guys collaborated. He left this planet way too early. That is the late great Kofi Burbridge.
Oh my God! No wonder he sounded familiar.
Exactly. And so that was my interview with Kofi from 2017, and we had this cosmic interview, much the same way you and I are doing this, and he's a little bit younger than you, obviously, but here's the thing: his parents, again, roots, the parents, him and O'Teal, they set up this thing where he wound up on stage at Howard University with Donald Byrd at like 12 years old. Can you, first of all, before we go any farther, can you talk about and reflect a little bit on Kofi? I never want him to be forgotten.
Well, Kofi was, there are people who knew Kofi much better than myself, but we got to know each other pretty well, especially during the time when I was in Susan Tedeschi's band, and there was kind of a personnel shift, and she let some of the guys in the band go. I was a little bit older than those guys, so I've always been a person who was never a part of any kind of clique.
Right.
I'm always kind of a solitary figure, and I don't like being part of cliques. I don't like cliques.
Sure.
Oh
yeah.
So I always avoided that kind of thing. So anyway, she let two or three of the guys go over a period of time, and when she did that, she still had work. She still had gigs coming up. So she called part of her husband's band, Kofi, Todd Smalley,
mm-hmm.
and Jan Rico on drums. And so they came in and kind of rescued things. They were the band for a little while. In fact, there's several videos online on YouTube where you can actually see them backing Susan up, and I'm on stage as well.
Mm.
So during that time when we were traveling around as her band, I got to know him pretty well, and we would go to have a meal together in the hotel restaurant and talk about things, and he would always talk about his family life and and he was a person who was close to his parents, which is always a very fortunate and wise thing. You know, people who are not close to their parents, I kind of feel bad for them.
I agree.
Because they're missing out on something, you know?
It's not always their fault. It's not always their fault, though. But, yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, it's always a very fortunate situation if you can have
It's true.
that part of your family life intact. And fortunately, Kofi was one of those people that really was close to his parents and respected them and listened to what they had to say. And he had great parents. So he would always speak very highly of them. And he was a very serious person, but at the same time, he was well-rounded because he was nuts, too, you know.
Dude, I'm telling you, I mean, I got to believe that you might have, I know that him and O'Teal kind of, you were really already well underway in your career by the late 70s, early 80s, but did you guys reminisce at all about the D.C. scene? Because those guys were in it, too, a little bit later than you.
Well, the funny thing is that, like, I never bumped into them when we were all in the same city.
They were younger than you. They were definitely younger than you, you know?
Right. There was enough of an age difference where we were traveling in different circles, but at the same time, because I was older and I had already kind of made a name for myself in this area, they were a lot more aware of me than I was them.
Wow.
So I didn't know about Kofi and O'Teal until I ran into them on the jam band scene. And then we kind of backtracked, and I'm sitting there with my mouth open like, you mean to tell me we were like all in the same city at the same time?
I love it.
And we never played one gig together?
But
we get outside and start traveling on the road, and then I bump into them, you know. It's like meeting somebody in Switzerland that lived around the corner from you in D.C.
It's so, I mean, it's like the ghost. It's just funny that, so they knew you. They probably, like, they were like, you were probably like an idol of, you know, they looked up to you because you were known.
Well, yeah, I mean, Kofi said that his dad used to mention me to him.
Dude, his dad. And I think he's still with him. His dad was like he collected records, everything from Fela Kuti to, I mean, that dude was I think he's still with us. He was the hippest cat around, but he was mentioning Ron Holloway, dude. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, he mentioned me to Kofi. So, you know, when Kofi first told me that, I'm sitting there with my mouth open. I'm like, your dad knew about me and he mentioned me to you? I'm trying to wrap my head around that. You know?
I love it, dude.
This whole thing about traveling the world and bumping into people who live in, you know, 2 blocks from you is not a new phenomenon. I used to hear stories about all the iconic jazz musicians who used to live in New Jersey, like Dizzy, Milt Jackson, Illinois Jacquette. They all didn't live too far from each other.
Right.
Milt Hinton. And they would bump into each other. The only time they saw each other was over in Europe.
I mean, what's so you know, and one reason it's different. I mean, obviously, what's so magical is that there was no, outside of landlines, telephonic stuff. I mean, it wasn't like, you know, Dizzy wasn't texting Milt being like, yo, let's grab a bite. I mean, like, it was just very happenstance. It was very random. And it was just, it was magical in some ways. You didn't have the ability.
Listen, on that note,
yeah.
On that note, this is something that I witnessed in person, so I know that this happened. We were somewhere over in Europe, and there was somebody over there that wanted to send Dizzy some mail once he got back home, and maybe, you know, Dizzy was back home. So the guy is sending mail to Dizzy from Europe, and he's asking for all the particulars, you know, like zip code and all that. So Dizzy said, oh, you don't need that. Just say Dizzy Gillespie, New Jersey. So the guy looked at him like, yeah,
What, are you
right.
kidding me?
And then the guy, his road manager, was like, "No, he's serious." So it turned out that it was true. If you wanted to send Dizzy mail, all you needed was his name and
the state and the
city.
Yeah, and the state.
And he would make it to him.
Was it Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, or Orange, New Jersey, or just New Jersey?
It was, well, I mean, in other words, like he lived in Orange, but he was so famous that you didn't need to put that on the envelope. All you needed was Dizzy Gillespie, New Jersey.
So yeah, the name and the state, and it would get to him. That's classic.
It would get to him.
You know, because, and I also want to be clear, I use technology as a tool. Without technology and new media, I would never have connected with you. So I don't want to like bash it, but I just feel like there was this, I mean, you just never, it was, the other thing is like, you know, I loved your mentality. You know, today, in today's world, my generation and younger, through no fault of their own, but if they were going to get a chance to play with Ron Holloway or, you know, Sonny or someone like that, you know, it's always about expectation and not about intention. Your intention was to go and just approach them and see if they would let you come play with them, and you didn't want any money. You just wanted that experience. My generation, if we got the opportunity to play, we'd want somebody there videotaping it or taping it, making sure that we could collect it and marinate on it and perseverate on it. And see, you guys, without the technology, it was just all you wanted to do was keep growing as a musician. There was no expectation.
Well, everything was different.
Yeah.
Everything was different, as you say. I mean, like, I'm old enough now where I can I could freak out some of the young people that I play with just by telling them about how we used to make it to a gig. Like, everybody's trying to make it to the gig because we're all playing in places we've never been to before.
That right?
But now we have a GPS. When I was coming up, I had my car.
Yeah.
And I had a map, and I was not particularly great at reading maps.
Oh my God, yeah.
And so, you know, the only thing that I could really do was like plan, see if I could get into the general area, and then stop my car and jump into a phone booth and call a club. That's how I made it haphazardly to most of the gigs I played. But, you know, you ran into problems because some nutcase would have been in the phone booth and destroyed the phone for some reason.
Exactly.
So I'd go into the phone booth thinking, okay, let me call the club because I know I'm close. And I'd go in there and half the phone would be missing because somebody had like freaked out and cursed somebody out and broke the phone. It'd be all kinds of problems. And then sometimes I'd get through to the club and the girl behind the counter would answer, and there was like all this horrendous loud noise. And I realized as soon as she picked the phone up, so I'd be like, yeah, I'm trying to find, I can't hear you.
Trying to find the club.
I'm trying to find, you know, so I'd be raising my voice. And then finally she could hear me and she'd be like, do you see a Wendy's? No, I see McDonald's.
Oh, the landmarks. I mean, it's a miracle that, I mean, you know, I bet you can count on your hands the amount of times you didn't make it somewhere. I mean, you guys pretty much figured it out.
I made it every time.
Every time.
There were some times when the obstacle course was so horrendous, I actually walked into the club a little late. But at least I got there. And it's a miracle because, you know, we didn't have GPS. We didn't have iPhones.
It is a miracle. I don't know how the heck. I just want to I just want to put a button on this. Because I want to just get you actually were on the bandstand with him. You know, Kofi to me was so serious, but yet, like you said, he had a fire inside. Can you talk about how he ultimately, you know, playing with him and, you know, how, if you got off, I mean, not just getting off, but if you guys were able to, maybe a magical experience playing with Kofi. I know it doesn't seem possible that he left us, but he did. And, you know, and it's not, life is not fair, but I just wanted you to talk about that fire and how it came out on the bandstand, anything that, any kind of memorable story of playing with him.
Well, every time I found myself playing with him, it was memorable because he was such an outstanding player. And all the things that go into making a great soloist or somebody you want to listen to were there present in his playing, in his presentation. You know, you heard that he had an intellect. You heard wit. You heard humor. You heard vast knowledge of music.
Right.
And you heard, you know, all the tasteful things that somebody would play. But he was also adventurous, so he took chances while he played, you know. I have to say that for us, for he and I, we felt like kindred spirits,
right,
you know,
right,
on stage. It wasn't like I was not in awe of him. I was just glad he was there. I'm like, man, it's so great to be playing with somebody who is on this level, you know.
Love it.
And I'm not saying I'm below or above or anything like that. I'm just saying that he and I come from a similar place. So whenever we would get a chance to play together, we inspired each other. And those are the kind of qualities that I would hear consistently from him. You could always hear logical thinking, but I mean, the turn on was just hearing the inventiveness and the, you know, risk taking in his playing. He had such a command that he could like break the rules and still come out and land on his feet, you know?
No, I was going to say, like, Jeff Sipe, the great drummer, said that every time they'd be in the studio for any session, every time with Kofi, he'd nail it on the first take. It was always a first. I mean, he was so spontaneous, but yet, I guess it's one of those things you have to know the rules in order to break the rules so you can land on your feet.
Yeah.
Both you guys could do that.
Right.
And I just, you know, Ron, I'm having but I mean, we've been cooking here for 80 minutes. I mean, do you think we could do set 2 maybe next week? We got so much more to get to.
Yeah, I mean, like, check out and see how many complaints you get.
Dude, no, I want to end with one final. No, first of all, this is epic. I mean, dude, your career, it is just an honor. But I want to end with one final question in set 1, and that is, you know, in '64. So you were essentially, I mean, you were a kid.
I was about 11 years old.
So I've interviewed Eddie Henderson a few times, and he was at Howard University, and he was playing jazz in the music room, and the night security guard would come by and said, stop playing that end music, get your ass out of here. He put a gun to him. He put a gun on him. And
this is a security?
And this is security at Howard. Now, at the time, jazz was at that time still at the black university like that, there was still that belief that it was out of the blues, it was devil's music, classical music was the way to go. Then Donald Byrd got brought in as the head of the jazz department, and things changed. But did your dad ever, can you talk a little bit from your own point of view about the mistrust of, Ellis Marsalis has told me this, many cats, just why there was this general mistrust of a music that came from Black America known as jazz, and why there was, like you said, the audience didn't always show up. You're right about that. And in fact,
I mean, they couldn't afford to.
They couldn't afford to. And then and then Eddie told me also that when Train was, a lot of the audience was white skinned people too. I mean, they'd show up and Train was playing his modal music and women would be saying, make him stop. You know what I mean? But I'm just it's just this idea that like, it was like, oh, you don't play that devil's music. I mean, literally Eddie was like forced out by gunpoint because he was playing this horrendous, sinful music. And I wasn't sure if you were, I know you know that those stories and I know you know the history, but why was it like that?
For the same reason that white cops will approach a stopped car with black people in it with this gun drawn.
Right.
There's a stigma, there's this whole racist mentality that goes along with confronting black people. Like, there are people in this country that have bought this thing about black people are dangerous, they're all crooks, they're all criminals, they all take drugs, and some of them have tails. You know, it's like any derogatory thing, they want to latch onto it and believe it. And it is the biggest lie. Like, most of my friends, most of my white friends who actually frequented establishments that were owned by blacks and attended concerts where the audience was predominantly black. I had somebody tell me earlier today, a white person said to me, I used to go to such and such, and I was the only white person in there. I never had a problem.
Let me tell you, dude, I don't care if it was Terry Haggerty from the Sons of Champlin, you just nailed it. I have 4 or 5 stories, people going and saying the vibe, there was no vibe. It was so cool. It was the coolest. There were no problems.
Black
none
people
of
are not hostile. They're not looking to grab some white person and tie them up and set a fire. They're not like that. I don't know why, but they don't do that. It's I don't know who I'm offending right now.
No, but I also, no, because you're 100% right. And Tume even told me, even with body camera footage, you still can't convict a white cop. They might lose their job. You're never going to convict them, even when they brutally murder somebody on a video. But why were historically black colleges resistant to their own people's music? That is something that
because those people who think like that have been brainwashed about their own kind.
Brainwashed. Okay, that's it. There you go. Yep.
And look, I'm not, my tone of voice now, I'm not like directing this at you.
That's cool.
I'm always mystified at that kind of deception and buying into that kind of thing. It's like, are you really that stupid?
You're a sheep. Yeah, you're sheep. You're not thinking for yourself. But,
I'm coming home from a gig like at 4 a.m. from some part of some town. I cannot remember where I was right now. The only reason that I remember this particular night that occurred maybe 15 years ago, the one outstanding thing that happened that whole night was I'm on my way home, and lo and behold, there's one car on the road that I can see for miles, and it's somebody pulling up alongside me, and I'm stopped at a red light. There's nothing in front of us moving. There's nothing behind us moving. And I'm shocked that I'm seeing a car. So, I trained myself because I know, how people are.
Yeah.
And I didn't look over there. But then eventually I forgot and kind of glanced over to my left. And this woman who happened to be white had this terrified look on her face as she was looking at me. And then all of a sudden, I look away because I'm thinking, oh, here we go.
Right.
And all of a sudden I hear click. And I say to myself, you've got to be kidding. This woman reached over and locked her door, and there's nobody around for 50 miles. And I'm saying that alone was reason for me to jump out of my car and go boo. What are you locking your door for?
You know, this is, oh my God.
I don't care who you are. I don't want to know who you are.
Yeah, like
I've got more money in my pocket than you do. I've never robbed anybody in my life. And here she goes, click. Get out of here.
I mean, Richard Davis said that, you know, he went up to a woman on the street to ask for directions because he was lost trying to get to the studio somewhere in L.A. or something, and she started to blood-curdling screaming. You know, and it's like, and you know it's funny because I've gone back, I've done a lot of interviews with other types of healers from different modalities the last couple of years outside of music, and a lot of them are women, and a lot of them came from towns all over America. Like Richard Davis spent the last part of his career at Madison, Wisconsin, teaching students music, but also tolerance of all races, because there are cats that, I mean, I know you know this, but that woman who locked her door, they grow up, and from the time that they can even remember hearing stuff, when they drive through the quote-unquote black part of town, oh, lock your doors, that's these kinds of people again, they get inculcated with this stereotypical, broad brush, completely inaccurate account based on the skin color of somebody. And if they're sentient enough and if they're enlightened enough, they break away from that. But that is the problem, is this blanket assessment of lock your door, have a gun. I thought when you heard click, I thought she was cocking a gun at you. That's what I thought you were going to say. But it's just it's like, yeah, man. I mean, dude, it's very complicated. I just found
it runs the gamut.
It
because
does.
Like,
yeah.
I have friends, you know, who would never think to do that. And like, they're single women, very attractive women, and if they see a black male by himself, there's no question in their minds. They're not thinking, "Oh my God, I'm getting ready to be attacked."
Right.
That's like the farthest thing from their mind, and it's the farthest thing from my mind. You know, I'm more worried about what might happen if I walk as the only black person into like a situation where I'm surrounded by rednecks.
I'm quite honestly surprised that you never, I mean, you know, because did you, I don't know, with Gil, Brian Jackson and him went to Liberty University. I'm not sure if you talked to him a lot about it, but I mean, the Klan from Rising Star, Maryland would come over, throw bottles through those windows. I mean, they'd come over and throw bottles through the sororities, through the windows. And I'm surprised you know, and then there's people like Mike Knock who were on the road with Yusef Lateef, and they broke down in Colorado and in this rural ass town. And, you know, like the part was going to have to be mailed in from San Francisco. And then all of a sudden they realized that they were not wanted in that town and they were being driven out of there. Have you actually had any encounters? Papa Molly's had these encounters. Any encounters with the Klan in your career?
I have to be honest with you. Absolutely no.
Well, I'm very happy. I'm very happy to hear that, because I mean the harrowing stories of integrated bands getting tracked down in the middle of Louisiana. The Butch Trucks has told me stories about. I mean, it's unbelievable. All I can say is the amount of grievance and the amount of going back to the original sin of this country. I just, people with white skin, there's just enough of them who I think the guilt is so strong, and the ability to actually accept the realities of our history are too intense that this madness just continues on. and I don't get it. And it's one of the reasons I started my show 10 years ago,
Well,
Ron. You know, it's
this is not anything you don't know, but when you are indoctrinated with the idea that you are superior because you happen to have white skin, and you can't let go of that, and to let go of that would be a threatening idea.
right.
You'll hold on to that for dear life.
That's it. You nailed it. See, and that's why going back to parents, my parents, I have a great relationship with them, but they never indoctrinated me like that, ever.
That's what it is. It's indoctrination.
That's what it is. And then the brainwashing. Hey, you just got it. You just got it. And that's a lot of these healers that I talk to, you know, they grew up and it was their mom or their dad. It was always there. Oh,
Man,
you're going through this part. You got to roll up the windows. Roll up the windows. I mean, what, you know, it's pretty depressing, man. But, you know, I mean, what?
I have had some encounters because of Facebook. I have learned so much in the last 5 to 7 years.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff that I just had no idea. I did not know that somebody could be that stupid. But before I get into that, I know you got to go, but let me tell you this.
Go
This
ahead.
actually happened.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm coming from a gig one night in Annapolis, Maryland. Annapolis, Maryland, after gig time, it's pretty quiet. You know, you get out of the club around 2 a.m., you get in your car, you're driving home, and very frequently you don't see any cars between the club and getting on the Beltway. So one night, there was something I was looking for in my car. I'm driving, not a car on the road, nowhere. I did not see this cop hiding, you know, over in the dark over
Always,
there. I did not see him.
always, yep.
So I pass him, and I'm looking for something on the floor. So, you know, for a moment, I went outside the line. And then I found what I was looking for. I got centered my car within the lines, made a left turn, and he comes up and puts on his lights. I don't think he put his siren on, but I saw the lights. So I immediately pulled over. I was thinking to myself, he's probably shocked that I responded to his lights so quickly. You know, so then he pulls up behind me, he gets out of his car, and he's walking kind of slow. And, you know, I'm just sitting there, and I'm thinking, okay, I hope he's not one of those guys
Right.
that I hear about. So then he gets up to me, and he goes, I guess you know why I'm pulling you over. No, sir. I said, did I not put my blinker on? Oh, you put your blinker on, but when you were back there at such and such at the intersection, you kind of like went over the line. Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking for something. Step out of your car.
You must be drunk.
I
Yeah,
said,
exactly. Right. Go ahead.
I said, now wait a minute. I said, I don't want to be a statistic tonight.
Right.
He said, oh, just step out of your car. I said, all right. So I get out of my car, and he asked me to like follow, you know, look up and follow the motion of his hand. He said, no, don't bend your neck. He said, I just want you to follow my finger with your eyes, but keep looking straight. I was like, what? So I did as he asked. You know, I like made sure I kept my head looking forward.
Right.
And kind of looked up. I'm like, what does this prove? So, you know, he's watching my eyes as my eyes are following his finger, and I did it correctly. And I'm really baffled, you know, like, what does this prove? So then he goes, I just want you to wait right here. Don't go anywhere. I said, okay. So I sat back in my car. He wanted me to sit back in the car. And he goes to his car, and I guess he's like doing a check, running my tag and all that stuff.
Sure.
And he comes back. He gets out of his car, and his whole mood has changed. And he goes, dude, why didn't you tell me you had played with the Allman Brothers?
Oh, my God.
I'm like, what? So, I guess they went online and saw my Wikipedia page or something.
Yeah, they're like, let's look at
that
this.
I
Oh my
played with the
God!
Allman
Dude,
Brothers.
so this is relatively recently, though. I mean, not last 10 years or so.
Oh, this was like about 3 years ago.
Oh my God! Why didn't you? You're like, because I thought you were gonna, because I watch the news and see all this insanity. They expect you to be like, yeah, I played with the Allman Brothers. It's like, what are you talking about?
I'm like, well, gee, if I'd only known, I would have mentioned it to begin with.
Yeah. I mean,
I didn't know you were that easily impressed by a musician and who he's played with. But that made all the difference to this guy. He's like, wow, man, why didn't you tell me you played with the Allman Brothers? I don't know, but this didn't cross my mind.
Did you, before I let you go, you remind your voice and your temperament, you remind me a lot of Howard Johnson. Did you ever hang with him?
I never hung with him. I was close to him a couple of times when he played some gigs with Taj Mahal.
Sure.
I think it was on the Blues Cruise one year, and I was on the Blues Cruise with Susan Tedeschi band, so I got to observe Howard for a bit. But no, I never even met him.
Yeah, I'll send you my. He left us. He passed us. He left this year. Rest in peace. And he was from Massillon, Ohio, which was the Underground Railroad was alive and well there. But Ron, we just cooked for. This was a ball. Let's do set 2 next week. I'm sure I'll get a lot of grief for this amazing interview, but let's do set 2.
Well, let's really piss them off.
I appreciate it, man. And because there's a few more things that was a lot more we need to get to, but it really was an honor, man. I can't thank you enough.
Oh, thank you. It was great to talk to you.
Right on, dude. I'll get a copy of this up later. I'll be transcribing all the stories and blowing them out on new media to keep people inspired during this pause. Hopefully, we'll get back on tracks one of these days. But yeah, we'll be in touch.
Oh man,
yeah.
I certainly hope so. It's been too long since. We lost so many people and clubs closing everywhere. Here in D.C., they're talking about the Blues Alley is either going to have to close or maybe they can relocate. And that's a club that's been around since 1960s.
Yeah, didn't you play there with Gil?
I played there with Dizzy Gillespie for many years.
Sure.
And I sat in with Freddie there. I sat in with McCoy Tyner there.
Wow.
Sat in with Norman Connors there.
Love it.
I'm the person that got Gil Scott Heron his first gig at Blues Alley because he wasn't like one of the artists who played there, so I kind of was the bridge there. So that club was like my home base for quite a while.
We could talk for 3 hours. Let's cut it and we'll do part 2 next week.
By all means.
All right. Much love to you, man. Be cool.
All right. You take care of yourself.
Thank you, brother. You too.
All right.
Later.
Bye.
What an honor. Hang with a legendary musician, Ron Holloway. That's why I do my program. That's it for the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll be back on Power.